If you want to get into Dungeons and Dragons, you need three core rule books: Player's Guide, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster's Manual. 2024 gave us a new Player's Guide and a new Dungeon Master's Guide, and this year, 2025, we have the new updated Monster Manual coming out, boasting over 500 monsters. So this is the most comprehensive rule book we've got coming out as a bestiary for Dungeons and Dragons. And it has had its own controversies, from making hags male now, creating alignment, or let's say giving monsters alignments which predominantly is neutral, or even down to the order of the way the creatures and monsters are put into the book. It seems to have really divided the fan base. And this one today that I've just found, I think might divide it even more. So before I get into the article, my name's Adrian from Dungeons and Dyslexia. This is my channel based on roleplay and news reviews. I also deal with crowdfunding. So yeah, let's get into this article that I was reading. So in the new Monsters Dungeons and Dragons manual, more unfortunately is less. So the final core rule book for 2024 new books is coming this year. So, and like it says in this article, the Monster Manual, Monster Bestiaries, creature terms have always been my favorite rule books. And I'm exactly the same. So I started this article, I was quite positive, thinking, here we go, because a Monster Manual, for me, it's where you create one-shots or even campaigns as a homebrew dungeon master. So obviously they're reprinting and changing from the 2014 set. It's got over 500 monsters in now. 2014 was over 300. We've got some good. This article actually starts with a bit of good news. There's some new things to kill. We've got this Blob of Annihilation, Animal Lords, and then Haunting Revenant. So, and these are big apex creatures, effectively. So the Blob of Annihilation is a CR rated 23 ooze that sends people to the astral plane when it dies. Animal Lords look more like normal, but they are actually CR rating 20 celestials with powerful spells, shape shifting, and legendary abilities that make them incredibly hard to hit. And the writer's personal favourite is the Haunting Revenant, which is a form of undead that animates and an entire ruins of buildings into a malevolent monster hellbent on lurking and where he travels. So this actually looks probably like a house-size mimic, maybe. It's definitely how I think we could be using it. So not every addition to the monster manual is aimed at epic level play. Most monsters have gotten a new variant that allow GMs to mix things up a bit in their game. There's feral, primeval, owlbears, flaming skeletons, blue-wit pups, and even new versions of old standbys like gnolls and goblins. Not sounding bad so far. Of course, they didn't just add some shiny variants to their favourite monsters, they've also tweaked and largely optimised every beastie up to including the Tarrasque, which the Tarrasque did need changing, because whether you're aware, Tarrasque was, I think it was a CR rating 30 creature that a flying level 1 creature could technically kill and take out. It did need a little bit of work on the Tarrasque. Yet in third, especially second AD&D and first edition, the Tarrasque was just this unkillable end game boss. So yeah, that did need a massive overhaul. But every monster now has an alignment, which we spoke about. Let's just say split people, though technically this is just a suggestion. But they've also got this Dark Souled boss subtitle, which the Magmin includes Reckless Elemental Arsenalist, Octonauts, a Garbage Heap Gourmand, and the Flump Strange Ally from the Strange Place. They need them? No, I bear in mind this: if 500 creatures, each one of these is going to have a subtitle. That's probably going to take up quite a lot of pages of text. And I'll come back to that as we get further in the article. Some of these creatures, however, are more impactful, especially when it comes to some of the most iconic creatures in the game. So the Gith. The Gith lore is largely the same, though there's less emphasis on the different types between Githyanki and Githzerai. It may seem minor, but the new rulebook doesn't classify Gith as humanoid. Instead, they're now classed as aberrations like their former masters, the Ithalid. Both kinds of Gith now get new forms in the form of the Githyanki Dracomaster and the Githzerai Scion. Obviously, this isn't going to have a huge effect on the way the creatures look, but what it will do is change the types of spells you can use because no longer whole person is going to have any effect on something that's an aberration. So I don't overly mind this one because it does just sort of shake up. I think one of the problems from a meta point of view is that players do have this, they'll see a creature, they'll know exactly how to interact with it. So this one I don't think's too bad. Liches. The biggest change to liches is entirely about the nomenclature. So instead of the Greek word phylactery, which has caused some controversy in the world of fantasy due to the association with the tephilim used in Judaism for prayer, the monster manual now uses spirit jar. It functions the same, and I'm not sure the change will be superseded 50 years of precedent, but it's an example of wizards working to be as inclusive as possible. Again, cultural sensitivity. It's all well and good if you're being sensitive to all cultures. Okay, to me, it's just a word. It's a fantasy game. So I don't know. I don't get it. But this one, as you can see from the art, surprised me because these look absolutely ridiculous. So these are now the Sphinxes. Sphinxes get a huge change in the monster manual by doing away with the classic gendered Sphinx, classically the Andro Sphinx and the Geo Sphinx. Instead, they are Sphinxes of Wonder, CR1, Secret, CR8, Law, CR11, Valar, CR17. So also, note here, this is where you're starting to see the 500 monsters in the monster manual. We're not seeing 500 individual monsters. We are seeing probably 300 monsters with three, maybe four different variants, which they're classing as 500. I think they technically classed it as 500 stat blocks, as a small little get round. They're also multicolored now and classified as celestials instead of monstrosities. These changes in form and classification reflect way more the Sphinxes are depicted in Hinduism and Buddhism rather than Greek Egyptian influences on previous editions. There's no mention of the Andro or Gio forms still in the Existium, though they're listed on the conversion tables to be equivalent of the Vara and Law Sphinxes, respectively. The Rakshasas, they're mechanically the same, but as before, they've lost most of their uniqueness. Instead of being evil tiger-headed people with backwards hands, they now have an animal head. The art in the game shows them as a crocodile, tiger, ibex, and bird, and the backward arms are just one of the possible quirks to have them rather than their main identifier. This combined with a hyper-condensed lore and every monster suffers from more on that later on, which means they're just not interesting anymore. And finally, orcs, they're not even in the monster manual at all. Gone. They have now been moved exclusively over to the player's handbook, and because obviously they're now a playable race. So in the 2015 version, they did give up one of the iconic D&D monsters 4 pages of lore, stat blocks, and art. Now they show up in the appendix table that let you convert them to a new monster. Other races like goblins, hobgoblins, and kobolds are still included in the book, but not orcs. So I just find that strange. In the last 50 years, they've been one of the sort of staple go-to bad guys, so to speak. And yes, they can be playable characters, but they're still equally monsters. And my worry with this sort of precedent is that when you move a monster and try to give it humanity, how far do you go with carrying on moving more and more creatures from the monster manual to the human manual or the player's guide, if that makes sense? So it's I don't know. I it's an odd one for me. These are strange. The Sphinxes is strange. It's just I kind of see what they're doing, but there's just going to be so many people that just are not going to buy this anymore. So here we go. The new monster manual was touted as the biggest with 500 monsters, 85 new ones, but it's not true. Part of what comes from them is from moving NPCs like druids, performers, and cultists out of the appendix where they were before into the main rulebook. While I understand that wanting to put these tools alongside each other, it ends up feeling like fuller. This shift is also part of one of the biggest issues with the book organization. Unlike the monster manuals, so this is back into the way it's listed. Most of every group in a monster has been split from each other. So rather than a section saying devils, which you had before, so you'd have a section on dragons, color all the dragons, devils, list all the devils. It then separates them out to have the lemurs, imps, gorgons, etc. These monsters are now in different places. So if you know you want a devil, and you're going to be using the devil as just one example, he said, you now have to seek and look through the book to find the one you want. It's very confusing, choice and counterintuitive the way the book's accessible. Because, yeah, if you think about it, if you're looking for a devil creature and you don't know a devil creature, what they're all called, you're going to really struggle to find it. So you're going to have to go into appendixes to find it. But also, what I liked with the 2014 setup and the previous versions, again, let's stick with devils or even dragons, is when you're looking for a dragon, they'll list dragons from level, say, 5 all the way up to 2024. So you can actually pick the dragon based on the CR rating for where the players are, or a few levels ahead for them to catch up for a campaign or build into sort of one shots. Same with devils, same with any of the creatures. It's going to be harder for people to homebrew and create stuff without even knowing stuff nowadays. So my biggest gripe with the Monster Manual is not with mechanics, which is largely excellent. It's with the lore, or therefore lack of. So when trying to fit so many monsters in this book, they've cut out pages of fluff from the final product. So creatures like the Aboleth, Beholders, Mind Flayers, from multiple page descriptions that show you their backstories, the place in the world, is down to 3 paragraphs at best and a table to roll on. You're lucky to even get a quip from Mordecai. This, as he says, was always the best part of the Monument Monster Manual for player and GMs alike. And I totally agree because, said earlier, I tend to use monster manuals for one shots or campaign creatures. And by having a lot of lore into the creature, you can actually build things around it. So from campaigns, it gives you an idea of how they hunt or stalk. Are they a solitary creature? Do they live in, is there several of them? Because if you then take this away from the ability of games masters to homebrew, because obviously the more lore and information you've got, the easier it is to homebrew an adventure. You're then taking games masters into buying pre-made adventures, which can be problematic. One, they've got to pay for them. Prepaid adventures aren't cheap because someone's got to write and design them. You've then got to hope that everyone in your group hasn't played it. And then thirdly, a lot of the pre-made adventures can also be not the best, or let's say the most suited to a group. Because if you allow your players to create their own group, and then you shoehorn in an adventure that you bought, or more importantly, you then go and buy a second. So you've run an adventure up to level 4, then you go and buy a level adventure from 5 to 8, for argument's sake. They might not fit into that adventure entirely. You need to have an element of home brewing. Also, sometimes it's nice to actually take a pre-existing adventure and switch some monsters in and out. And you need to know that element of lore, especially if you're new to Dungeons and Dragons, on what type of creature does what, how they're encountered, how they hunt, how they stalk, how they think. Lore is oddly the bit that's made Dungeons and Dragons so good and successful over the 50 years. Of the worlds, Dungeons and Dragons is not a game where you just chuck dice and your players and characters interact. The reason it's so successful is the lore. And to take the lore out for a book where you're going to get so much, well, Games Master is going to get so much out of, seems a very silly move to this old player. Okay, so he doesn't want to entirely focus on the negative, so he does end on a positive, which is nice. So the art direction in the new Monster Manual is some of the best he's ever seen. It isn't just static illustrations; it shows each creature in its habitat. So maybe they've used the habitat to get rid of it. So we'll have to wait and see whether they include all the monsters. Each monster's got its own art. If it has, that's probably good. And if it's in this habitat and you can see it, it might take a little bit of the pressure off the lore, maybe. The new emphasis on habitats is useful as well, with each entry telling you where to find the monster in the table at the back, helpfully grouping them together by biome. As a pure resource, the Monster Manual will offer a lot of D&D to those who need raw stats. While I disagree with the book's shift to pure Unity, you can also see that this is a helpful tool for planning out campaigns and encounters. There's also plenty of creative design choices made at D&D, even if it's not in the space we need to really flourish like it should. So that's it. That's the article. again, I don't think there's anything massive in there, but the changes to the Sphinxes, if you're going to go with something entirely different, that's up to you. I think the shift of the orcs, moving the orcs out and making them completely playable and not a monster other than an appendix add-in, I don't like that one at all. It sets a really precedence on where you go forward. Getting rid of the Sphinx's genders, yeah, not massive, but is this just going to be a sign of the 500 stat blocks as opposed to the 500 monsters? I think we're definitely going to see that. Um, Let me know in the comments below. Whenever I do these videos, it's the comments are just filled with, they seem to be, well, I wasn't buying it anyway. It's not aimed for us. I don't know what you're worried about. It's just a book. It's just race. It's just gender, whatever it may be. So, but yeah, it's always interesting to hear comments. So please do let me know. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.